It is 7 o'clock. Good to see you this morning. It may well be April Fool's Day, but for millions waking up across the country, the impact of the cost of living crisis is no laughing matter. An unprecedented rise in the energy cap means the number of people in fuel stress has doubled overnight. Add in the national insurance hike, staggering inflation, and of course those record fuel prices, and it is not hard to see why living standards have fallen to their lowest level since the 1950s. The Chancellor has introduced some measures to soften the blow, but will they be enough? I'll shortly be joined by the Policing Minister, Kit Malthouse. I'll then be asking the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, how he would tackle the crisis. And of course, a little later this hour, Ukraine's Deputy Health Minister is on the show as the humanitarian crisis there deepens. It is Friday, the 1st of April. Breaking point. The biggest jump in energy bills ever, with a warning of worse to come. Turning off the taps. Russia vows to cut Europe's gas supply today unless it's paid for in rubles. France and Germany reject the demand, calling it blackmail. Evacuating Mariupol. Another attempt to get thousands out of the besieged city today as peace talks resume. Backtracking on a U-turn. The government says it will ban gay conversion therapy. No symptoms, no test. The end of free COVID lateral flow testing for most people in England. The slap heard around the world. The Oscars producer says police were prepared to arrest Will Smith on the night.
And I'm live in Doha, where the controversies continue, but it is time for the World Cup final draw. Wales and Scotland could still qualify, and Southgate says England could win it if they are close to perfect.
Also on the programme, ahead of World Autism Day, I'll be speaking to the former senior RAF officer about the film he produced on how nature has helped his severely autistic brother.
I'm not in love, no, no.
And I'll be joined by the lead singer of 10cc as the legendary band prepare to embark on their ultimate greatest hits tour. Morning all. It is the biggest jump in household fuel bills in living memory, dealing a massive blow to millions of families already struggling with the soaring cost of living. From today, the energy price cap will rise significantly, which means the number of people in fuel stress has doubled to 5 million. And there are warnings of worse to come when bills start to reflect the effects of the war in Ukraine. Well, let's just take a quick look at the numbers. The price cap, well, it's increasing by 54%. That is, on average, a rise of £693 per year, meaning the typical household bill jumps from £1,277 to £1,971. It's estimated this will have an effect on around 22 million households. The price increase, well, it's being largely driven by the cost of wholesale energy, which, of course, has risen sharply. But it's not just energy bills. National insurance contributions are also going up by 1.25 points this month, and the rate of inflation expected to reach a 40-year high of 8.7%. Well, let's get the view from the government now on the cost of living crisis. The Minister for Policing, Kit Malthouse, joins us once again on the programme. Minister, it's good to see you this morning. And
Morning.
The reason I say so, whenever we have chatted in the past, you, compared to some of your colleagues, have always been prepared to be quite candid about what is going on. And at a moment like this, I think the public deserves a little bit of candour. How bad are things about to get for a large number of Britons?
Well, obviously, as you quite rightly say, it's very tough at the moment. We completely acknowledge that the combination of factors that you outlined in your run-up to this interview has meant that prices are rising significantly, energy prices in particular, driven by a variety of factors post-pandemic, the war in Ukraine, other kind of global factors outside of our immediate control. And it is tough For those of us who have a smart meter, as we do here in my house, we can see how much it's costing us on an hourly basis, and it is not happy reading. Having said that, obviously, notwithstanding the rise in the national insurance threshold that the rise in the national insurance rate that you just outlined, there are other measures that the Chancellor has taken to try and help with some of the cost of living problems. So, the cut in fuel duty, obviously the national insurance threshold will be raised from July. That's worth about 300 quid a year to sort of 30 million working people across the country. We've got this household support fund now of £1 billion that's targeting those in real need across the whole of England and Wales. And then, of course, the other thing to bear in mind that happens today, of course, is the national living wage rises by 6.6% to £9.50, which is the largest rise, I think, for some time. And that should be about £1,000 a year for a full-time worker. So while it is tough, obviously the Chancellor's trying to do his best to ameliorate the challenge, although we can't go all the way and ameliorate it all, I'm afraid.
No, but some would question why a lot of the assistance appears to have been targeted at those who are perhaps not most in need. I mean, the estimates vary, but a kind of a ballpark figure appears to be like £1 in £3 announced by the Chancellor in the spring statement going to the bottom half of the income distribution. Why are we spending 2 out of 3 on the top half?
Well, I'm not sure we'd necessarily characterise it that way. We are targeting lots of the assistance at people at the lower end of the wage distribution. So whether that's the rise of the national living wage, this household support fund, £1 billion now being targeted. And then, of course, raising the national insurance threshold helps them too. And don't forget the change in the universal credit taper for those who are in receipt of universal credit, but also working. That's worth about £1,000 a year. So when you take it in the round, I think you'll find it is skewed towards the bottom end, albeit we want to try and help as many people as possible within the financial constraints that we've got. It's worth remembering as well, of course, that one of the biggest helps is to be in work, and obviously levels of employment are at an all-time high at the moment.
You're talking about payroll, presumably. You're not talking about numbers in work, because if we're comparing numbers
payroll,
and numbers, but this is a mistake that the government has repeatedly made, for whatever purpose. But actually, if we're talking about the numbers of people in work at the moment, we're talking several 100,000 fewer than there were at the start of the pandemic. So let's just park that for a second. What specifically, though, are we doing for those people who are not earning a wage, or those people who are on such low incomes that they are still in receipt of universal credit? We have seen a small percentage point rise in universal credit, but one which will, I'm sure you will agree, be utterly dwarfed by the inflation which we will experience this year.
Well, obviously, the key targeting mechanism is this household support fund. We had it at £500 million. It was very successful. Local authorities targeting that money at those most in need at the lower end of the economic scale. We've doubled that now to £1 billion. And obviously, hopefully, we have got a high number of vacancies in the economy. Hopefully, they can work with their Department of Work and Pensions work coaches to get into work and benefit from that change in the taper. We want to see everyone.
What if they don't? What if they can't find a job?
And that's what we're trying to do.
What if they can't find a job? I mean, on the one hand, we're saying, we're seeing almost record employment. You also say just a moment ago there are lots of job vacancies out there. So I'm slightly confused. But for those people who do not have a job right now, or, for example, a single mother working 20 hours a week in receipt of universal credit, she will be poorer off as a result of the changes made by the Chancellor.
Well, as I say, if she's struggling, then there's the household support fund that she can look to. Obviously,
which is finite.
It is finite, but it's very targeted. It's £1 billion that's being targeted. And as we move into the rest of the year, obviously the Chancellor is going to monitor the situation very closely and think about what more we may be able to do to help. And he's signalled that in the past. Look, Neil, you are quite right. We are facing a very difficult global situation here, driven by external factors outside the country. At the same time, we're facing a very challenging financial situation internally, having spent billions and billions of pounds getting ourselves through the pandemic in good shape. What we're trying to do is balance that situation, help as many people as we can with what we acknowledge is a very tough situation at the moment, and then hope that over time things will improve from an inflation and a fuel price point of view, and we can get back onto the path to prosperity.
When the Chancellor describes the policy initiatives that he's brought forward as progressive, what does he mean by that? I just want to focus for a second on the council tax rebate. I will be in receipt of that. You may well be in receipt of that. I'm just going to gently suggest that if a breakfast television news presenter is in receipt of funding, it's not a progressive policy. I don't need it.
Well, I mean, obviously, everybody is suffering from the fuel price rise. Lots of people need some assistance. Yeah, but we also pumping the council tax bill into people at Band A in particular, and then grading it over time. So we're trying to give, Niall, a kind of balanced package of assistance across the whole of the economy. Right now, whether that is targeting money at people who are really struggling through the Household Support Fund or providing widespread relief through the raise in the national insurance threshold, we're trying to give a balanced package across the whole of the economy because people struggle in different ways. You know, if you are a family of two parents with children, you've got significant extra costs compared to a single person living alone. So we need to make sure that we have a very balanced package that gives as much assistance as we can within the constraints that we've got.
But let's take just a couple of the measures you were talking about there. I mean, national insurance, I get it. If you expand at the bottom, that does mean fewer people are paying tax. But what of those who aren't at that threshold point already? Chancellor made an awful lot about the cut in fuel duty when he was at the dispatch box. Again, if you look at the numbers, those at the very bottom end, 55% of the bottom demographic don't drive. These measures do not help. I mean, are you entirely confident that the Chancellor, a man who, on a Treasury-organised photo opportunity, couldn't work out how to pay for petrol at the pump, are you in any way confident that this is a man who genuinely knows what it is like to be counting the pennies in your pocket?
I am, yes, and I think that's unfair on him. You've got to remember the great advantage of our system is that all of us as MPs are anchored in our constituencies, right? And we sit down, as I will be later today, in a constituency surgery, and we deal with our constituents on a daily basis with the very huge variety of issues and problems that we had. So notwithstanding our own particular situation financially, obviously we have, heavy exposure to how everybody across the whole of the
Of course, but I'm talking about his individual ability to empathise with people at the bottom end of society. I mean, this is a Chancellor that thought there was a debate about whether or not to give poor kids food during the summer holidays.
Well, as I say, I think that's unfair. The Chancellor is trying to do a very difficult thing, which is to balance the requirements of the British people for assistance at a time of need against the long-term financial health of the whole country. Right, we've just come through a pandemic where we had to spend 400 billion plus to keep the economy on track. That work that he did has kept hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in work and kept them going through one of the most difficult things we've faced in this country since the Second World War. That was a massively challenging job, and he pulled it off with enormous skill and dexterity. Of course, he's in touch with the problems of the British people, and that's why we brought in the measures that we've had. But as he's said, just I think yesterday, right, the constraints of the national economy mean that we can't solve every problem. We have to monitor the situation.
Everyone understands that. Everyone understands that. I'm sorry, Minister.
Efficiently, financially as we can to help as many people as we can.
OK, then, well, why on earth, then, are we starting today to charge people for lateral flow tests? We've both conceded a moment ago that genuinely people are literally counting the pennies in their pockets. If it is a toss-up between spending £2 on food for your kids or £2 on a lateral flow test, we both know which way people's priorities will go. Why are we making people right now choose between putting food in their kids' belly and working out whether or not they've got COVID?
Well, that's because obviously we're moving to a situation, as the Prime Minister has outlined, where we have to now live with COVID and deal with it.
Hospital admissions are running as high as they've been this year, Minister.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I just had it myself a couple of weeks ago, as has the rest of my family. So we've had impact at home too. Look, we're moving towards living with COVID. The lateral flow test was cost an absolute fortune every month. We believe now that we can sort of get on with normalising society, notwithstanding the rise in infections that we've seen.
I'm not asking you to pay for everyone. I'm not asking you to pay for my lateral flow test. I'm lucky enough to work for a company that provides them. I'm asking you to perhaps provide them, I don't know, to people on universal credit.
Well, as I say, the decision has been made at the Department of Health that the cost of it didn't justify the effect ongoing, that we're learning to live with COVID. Obviously, we're now rolling out, as you know, the fourth booster to those people most vulnerable. So we now have to live with this disease, I'm afraid, and that means that free lateral flows are coming to an end, given the cost-benefit analysis, I guess, that the Treasury has done.
I do want to ask, just as we wrap up, about the energy strategy, the pending energy strategy. When will that be published? Like, I understand that everyone in government has an absolute ton on their plate at the moment, but the simple truth of the matter is you were wrestling with the energy strategy back when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, when Greg Clark was the Business and Energy Secretary. There was a debate ongoing then about nuclear power and how to fund it. When are we going to get the detail on this?
Well, as I understand it, there's obviously intensive conversations going on, particularly accelerated in the light of the Ukraine exacerbation, if you like, of the global energy situation. And I think that strategy will be appearing, I gather, shortly. It's obviously a big and extensive document that needs consideration, and there's some big financial strategic decisions that need to be made. So I'm not surprised that it's taking just a little bit more time than was anticipated. Hopefully it'll be next week, but let's see.
Is this, as has been pretty widely reported, because the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, as on so many issues at the moment, cannot come to agreement on nuclear power?
Well, I'm not close to the conversation, to be honest with you, but I don't know. But given the scale of the strategic decisions that are being made, I hope the British people would want their politicians to be really chewing on this issue very extensively and seriously, and having intensive discussions about what the right track is for the future. I think it's now accepted that governments of previous generations possibly made an error in not investing in nuclear, but these are huge investments required for the future of our power and fuel security. And so it's right that we take time to just get the decisions correct.
Kit Malthouse, great to have you on the programme this morning. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Well, we have now heard from the government, so might as well get the opposition's view of everything. Let's speak now to the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, joining us from a little bit further north. Sir Keir, lovely to see you this morning. I hope you were able just to listen into a little of what we were hearing from the government this morning in terms of their response to the cost of living crisis. But can we be brutally honest? No matter whether it's a Conservative Prime Minister, a Labour Prime Minister, monster-raving loony Prime Minister in Downing Street at the moment, no politician can act to ameliorate all of the effects of the cost of living crisis.
Well, of course, it's a difficult situation. I think we all appreciate that. But, you know, today is a really significant and worrying day for millions of people because their energy bills are going to go up by hundreds of pounds. And I've spoken to people across the country, particularly those who are struggling financially, and they're really worried about tossing and turning in their beds about how they're going to pay for this. What we've said as the Labour Party is, look, oil and gas companies in the North Sea have made more profit than they expected because global prices have been high. Therefore, we should have a windfall tax on that and use it to reduce those energy bills by up to £600 for those that need it most. So there's a very practical plan on the table, the only plan on the table, quite frankly. We've also said of all the times for the government to decide to impose more tax in national insurance, now is the wrong time. It's the wrong tax, it's the wrong time. And so I think most people are clear that when the government really needed to step up in that spring statement last week, they failed to do so, and their response is frankly pathetic on a very, very difficult day for millions and millions of people. Energy bills going up for more than we've ever seen on record. People are really struggling, and I just don't think the government gets it.
Yeah, just though on the windfall tax plan. I mean, isn't the problem? Well, indeed, it was identified by Pat McFadden, your colleague, when he was speaking to me last week. You can do it once. So your words are really important right now. You haven't said it in this interview, but you have said previously the windfall tax plan would all but eliminate the energy price rise for low-income families, pensioners, and middle-income families. I mean, that might be true now, but it won't be true later on this year when we see another set of price rises.
Look, it is a one-off tax. It's a windfall tax, but it would deal with the immediate crisis. And people waking up today are asking the question, is there a plan on the table to deal with the problem I've got right now, which is this rise in my prices, energy costs of hundreds of pounds? And they're seeing nothing from the government. The government says, well, you can have a loan starting in October of about £200, so 6 months.
I get that, but my point is simply, Sir Keir, my point is simply this.
To be paid back. But
my point is simply this,
yeah,
that the windfall tax is a one...
term?
Yep. My point is simply this,
that
the windfall tax that you're proposing will give a break of a few £100 right now, which will, frankly, by my looking at the numbers, be utterly wiped out by the price rise that we're all expecting come October.
Well, there are two answers to that. The first is, obviously, there's got to be a wider, medium and long-term strategy, and that's why we set out our energy strategy last week, which included turbocharging renewables, fast-forwarding on nuclear power, but importantly and significantly also a project to insulate homes and make them warmer. And I'm up in Manchester at the moment. Last week I was in Kirklees, and I saw for myself council houses that have already gone through that process of insulation. And I met the residents there. Their bills are already very, very low because of that insulation programme led by a Labour council. That's the sort of medium to long-term measure we need. So the Labour Party says we've got a plan for dealing with the immediate crisis, which is facing people today, but we've also got a plan for the longer term. The other thing I would add, of course, is that as global prices stay high, that profit for the oil and gas companies will be even higher probably by the autumn than it is now. But contrast the Labour Party that's got a practical plan to reduce bills now and the government's pathetic response. They just don't get it. They don't realise how hard people are struggling just at the moment for a variety of reasons, but many of them associated with the government's plan to increase tax and do nothing about these energy prices. OK, but in terms then of benefits, why does Labour not agree with plenty of those working in NGOs at the moment that benefits should not be raised in line with inflation? Well, I think that is something we should look at because benefits have fallen behind. What people wanted from the government last week in that spring statement... No, Sir Keir, I'm asking you, would you, as a point of principle, would you increase... I do think we should look at... Yeah, would you increase in line? It's not enough to say you're going to look at it. I'm asking for a policy commitment here. Would you increase in line with inflation? Because if you don't, people on benefits experience a real terms cut in the amount of money that they have. Yeah, I think we've got to look at it for that very reason, because otherwise people fall behind. That's what we wanted to see from the government last week. That's what we didn't see from the government last week. Frankly, if the government put a package on the table that Parliament could agree, we could get on with this. But the government just doesn't get the scale of the problem for millions and millions of people. There are local elections coming up in 5 weeks' time or so. And if people want to send a message to the government to say, Britain deserves better than this, your response to the cost of living crisis is pathetic, this is the chance to do it. What Labour is saying, we've got a plan on the table and we're on your side. We understand. We take your worries seriously. What about the minimum wage? The rise we're seeing today is apparently the third largest rise since the crash of 2008. Some people are asking why it's not the largest, price increase in minimum wage that we've seen since 2008. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that Andy MacDonald resigned from the front bench because you wouldn't agree to a minimum wage of £15 an hour. I mean, isn't that something that the Labour Party could, as a progressive party, get behind right now that would have an immediate effect on the quality of life for many, many people? Yeah, what we put on the table at our conference was an increase in the minimum wage to about £10 as part of a package of employment rights, day one rights. And I can tell you this, had that package been in place, had you had a Labour government taking seriously the security of people at work, you would not have had the scandal of P&O sacking 800 people in the awful way that they did. The government was on notice about that, not just because they had the memo the night before the 800 were made redundant, but also because 2 years ago we were saying to them, if you don't act on this minimum wage for seafarers, a company in the end is going to crash through the gate and replace their workforce with agency workers on less than the minimum wage. That's exactly what has happened. 2 years ago, the government said, "Oh, we acknowledge that's a problem. We'll look at it."
Okay.
They did nothing. P&O crashed through the gate. 800 people lost their jobs. And I think
do you generally think the British public
in relation to that is huge.
Sure. So, Sir Keir, do you generally believe the British public are looking at what Labour is offering in contrast to the government at the moment and thinking this is a radical party, this is a party with big ideas, an increase to roughly £10 and kind of for the minimum wage, a one-off windfall tax that would cover most of your price increases right now, but nothing for later on in the year? Where's the invention?
What I want people to do is to look at the Labour Party and see a party that understands their worries, that takes them seriously and is prepared to put practical plans on the table. People don't want a revolution. They do want to know, how am I going to pay my energy bill, which has just gone up today by hundreds of pounds? We're putting a practical plan on the table that says, for those that need it most, you ask oil and gas companies who have made more profit than they were expecting to make because of the high global prices. We say, ask those companies to pay their fair share, and that would reduce those bills by £600. So when I'm talking to pensioners, I was in Stevenage last week talking to pensioners, they weren't saying, Keir, we want a revolution. They were saying, Keir, we're really worried about our bill. One of the pensioners said to me that they keep their heating on 12 degrees because they think if they put it higher than that, they can't afford the bill. And this, people having to make a choice between heating and eating. I mean, in 21st century Britain, what people want to know is the Labour Party, does it understand those worries? And the answer to that is yes, we do. Have we got a practical solution to put on the table to reduce those bills by up to £600? Yes, we have. Contrast that with the government, where there was just a pathetic response, which isn't going to help very many people at all. And this is the thing that people are talking about all over the country. And the question in the end is, which party is on your side? And the Labour Party is on your side.
I just want to conclude, if we can, by talking about events, in inverted commas, in and around Downing Street. Carrie Johnson, you seem to have suggested, should be named if she is fined over Partygate. And if that's the case, should we then expect to hear, the next time your wife gets a parking ticket?
I think there's a huge difference between the situation of the wife of the Prime Minister breaking the rules made by the Prime Minister and any other situation. And I'm not focusing on Carrie here. I actually do agree with the general argument that families of politicians shouldn't be dragged in. But and therefore I focus
that's Rishi Sunak's
on
wife,
the Prime Minister.
Sir Keir.
Well, Rishi Sunak's wife. Again, I do agree with the general proposition that family members shouldn't be brought into political arguments. But so far as the Chancellor's wife is concerned, there's just a fundamental question of principle here, which is their household benefiting from money made in Russia when the government's put in place sanctions? That is in the public interest for us to have an answer to. I'm not attacking their family. I don't agree with that way of doing politics. But I do want to know, is the Chancellor's household, benefiting from money from a company that's investing in Russia when the government is saying, quite rightly, that nobody should be doing that, sanctions should be in place, and we should, particularly in the dreadful situation in Ukraine, frankly, be doing everything we can, not just to make life more difficult in Russia, but to cripple their ability to function. So it's not a personal attack. I don't agree with that. I absolutely don't agree with that. But I do think that I would have thought the Chancellor would actually want to come clean on this and say, actually, I can be very, very clear that my household doesn't benefit from any money that's come in any way from Russia during this invasion of Ukraine. It's a simple question. I think he should just answer it. It'd actually help his wife if he just answered that question.
Sir Keir Starmer, we have to leave it there because I have to admit it sounds like the breakfast rush might be starting just over your shoulder there. Sir Keir Starmer, thanks very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, let's turn our attention to the war in Ukraine now. And in a move which threatens to push wholesale gas prices even higher, President Putin said he will cut gas supplies to Europe unless payments are made in the Russian currency, the ruble, from today. France and Germany have dismissed the demand as blackmail. Well, here are some of the other developments this morning. After banning Russian oil last month, the US is to open its own oil reserves next month in a bid to bring down record costs. President Biden ordering the release of 1 million oil barrels a day for 6 months. Ukrainian authorities say that Russia has handed back control of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, the last Russian troops reportedly leaving earlier this morning. The Ministry of Defence says that Kiev and Chernihiv have seen continued air missile attack, despite Russian promises to scale back their assault on the cities. The MOD also says that Russia is redeploying troops from Georgia to Ukraine to make up for its casualties. They add it is highly unlikely Russia had been expecting to do this. It is the flattened suburb, just a few miles away from Ukraine's capital. Irpin has been constantly bombarded by Russian forces for more than a month. And with little or no access to water or electricity, many of its residents haven't eaten for several days. Sky's special correspondent Alex Crawford witnessed the scale of the destruction alongside the Ukrainian military.
The place is littered with unexploded ordnance, in playgrounds, in residential forecourts. Nowhere was off limits and there was no mercy shown for Irpin's residents. People obviously tried to pack their cars to try and get out of here as the shelling came in, and you can see the place is strewn with belongings as they tried to get out, but the shells were coming in and hitting even the vehicles as they tried to escape.
And you can see Alex's full report from Irpin a little later this morning on Sky News Breakfast. But before that, let's take a look at some of the day's other headlines now. And the government will ban so-called conversion therapy for gay and bisexual people in England and Wales, but not for trans people. It was initially announced that ministers would not be fulfilling a pledge to ban the practice, but Downing Street hastily backtracked after facing retaliation from LGBT groups and some MPs. MPs are to hold an inquiry into the detention and release from Iran of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Anoush Ashuri. The Commons Foreign Affairs Committee said it would take evidence on how their cases were handled by British officials as part of a wider investigation into state-level hostage situations. From today, MPs will see their pay increase by more than £2,200 a year. The Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority that sets MPs' pay recommended the rise, taking their annual salary to £84,000. Both Boris Johnson and Sir Keir Starmer were against the increase at a time when millions are feeling the impact of rising prices. Well, in the last few minutes, on the day that's seen millions plunged into financial uncertainty as a result of rising energy prices, the Policing Minister, Kit Malthouse, defended the Chancellor's handling of the cost of living crisis. He told me Rishi Sunak is trying to strike a balance between supporting the public and managing the needs of the economy.
The Chancellor is trying to do a very difficult thing, which is to balance the requirements of the British people for assistance at a time of need against the long-term financial health of the whole country. Right? We've just come through a pandemic where we had to spend 400 billion plus to keep the economy on track. That work that he did has kept hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in work and kept them going through one of the most difficult things we've faced in this country since the Second World War. That was a massively challenging job, and he pulled it off with enormous skill and dexterity. Of course, he's in touch with the problems of the British people, and that's why we brought in the measures that we've had. But as he's said, just I think yesterday, right, the constraints of the national economy mean that we can't solve every problem. We have to monitor the situation and move ahead as efficiently financially as we can to help as many people as we can.
Well, I also spoke with the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer. He was, less than impressed with the government's handling of the crisis. Here's what he told me.
Oil and gas companies in the North Sea have made more profit than they expected because global prices have been high. Therefore, we should have a windfall tax on that and use it to reduce those energy bills by up to £600 for those that need it most. So there's a very practical plan on the table, the only plan on the table, quite frankly. We've also said of all the times for the government to decide to impose more tax in national insurance, now is the wrong time. The government really needed to step up in that spring statement last week They failed to do so, and their response is, frankly, pathetic on a very, very difficult day for millions and millions of people.
Ali Fortescue was lurking in the wings and listening into both of those interviews. I mean, what have we learned beyond the fact that clearly the government and the official opposition have very different approaches to dealing with the rise in the cost of living?
Well, I think we heard the Minister there admitting that there's a problem. That's something the Prime Minister said this week. He said the cost of living is running too high. And we heard Kit Malthouse there saying prices are rising significantly. It is tough. But as you rightly asked him, is this targeting the right people? Is it getting to the people that need it most? He talked about the £1 billion for council, the NI threshold rising. But you were rightly saying, you know, things like the fuel duty cut, that isn't going to help people that actually are on the lowest income. We know that inflation is rising much more quickly than benefits. Yeah. And I think, you know, we could hear there, and talking to backbench MPs, you know, there's a real sense of expectation now that we will see the Chancellor going further. And we heard the Minister there saying that the situation's being monitored closely. He said we have to think about what more we may have to do. So I think you get a sense there that we might see the Chancellor going further. Labour clearly spotting an opportunity. Keir Starmer there, keen once again to talk about that windfall tax on energy companies. But as you were rightly saying, you know, that's not necessary. That is a short-term thing. That's something you can do once. It's not necessarily going to solve the problem in the long term. He was talking about their energy strategy. Of course, we're still waiting for the government's energy strategy. But again, that's a kind of long-term plan. We're not going to be able to invest in nuclear straight away. So what are they actually going to do in the medium term? And I think that's a big question for Labour.
But when we say that the assistance has perhaps not been targeted, I mean, we talked about this, and I talked about this in the interview with Kit Malthouse. When you're talking about national insurance, kind of sorting the threshold, when you're talking about fuel duty, there are people at the very bottom that won't be assisted by any of that. So is it fair to say that the government's assistance has very much been focused on people in work?
Well, there's certainly analysis that suggests that the majority of people that are going to be helped aren't necessarily the people at the very, you know, earning the very least. And as I say, you know, benefits are being massively outstripped by inflation. And it was interesting to hear Keir Starmer, you're really pushing him there, because if Labour really are the party of working people, are they actually going to commit to keep benefits in line with inflation? He said that's something he's going to look at, but he didn't actually confirm if that was a policy that Labour are going to be moving forwards there. But I think that's something that Labour are going to keep facing a lot of pressure on. Yeah,
I mean, it's slightly too early in the parliamentary cycle for that commitment. For now, thanks very much, Ali. But let's take you through the front pages. And it is no surprise that the cost of living crisis is on many of the fronts. April Cruel Day. That's the headline in the Mirror. Consumers hit with a range of price and tax hikes that amount to what the paper calls the worst attack on living standards. The Metro leads with news of energy company websites crashing as customers try to get their meter readings in before they're hit by those big price rises. The Eye says that senior Conservative MPs are accusing the Chancellor of being politically naive as national insurance increases. The Daily Mail features a story about Prince Andrew. The paper says it's seen court documents which show the royal has been embroiled in a fraud case. There is no suggestion of any wrongdoing on his part. And here is the Times. It reports that Britain is worried that America, France and Germany will pressure Ukraine into a peace deal with Russia that will make too many concessions to Moscow. Well, a new humanitarian corridor was meant to open in Mariupol this morning, but in the last few minutes, the besieged city's mayor says that Russian forces are not allowing aid in, and that the city is very dangerous to try and exit. Let's bring in our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, who's in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv. Deborah, good to see you. I mean, I suppose whilst we hope for those humanitarian corridors to open up, the bigger picture is that we need to get some sort of resolution to the crisis. And the only way resolution appears likely is through some form of negotiated settlement. It's just what you have to give up to get that settlement.
Yes, that's been a question that has eluded negotiators so far. Here we are more than a month into this war, and situations in cities like Mariupol that you were just talking about are absolutely desperate. Yesterday there'd been a glimmer of hope with the Russian side indicating they would allow humanitarian aid in and evacuations out, and yet today, like you said, we're hearing from an aide to the mayor of that city saying that Russian forces aren't allowing this humanitarian aid. The two sides just don't seem to be able to keep these attempts at ceasefires in and around Mariupol together. And for the people that are still left inside that city, it's absolutely desperate. The testimonies that we're hearing from residents that have managed to escape and from images early on, you'll remember there was a very brave Associated Press camera team that were in the city and were able to document the impact of the Russian bombardment on civilian infrastructure, including a maternity hospital. There was also that theatre, you'll remember, where they had the words children written outside, and yet it was struck by a large Russian attack. The situation inside is dire for those left. Food supplies short, energy supplies very, very low, water running out. That's why humanitarian aid is so crucial. And in terms of the wider battle that's going on across the country, the Ukrainian president has said that he is preparing for more battles ahead in the Donbass area to the east, around the southern city of Mariupol, as it seems that Russia, which has failed in its objectives to take cities like here in Kyiv and around the north, focusing more its firepower towards the east. That was an area that had been heavily contested for 8 years, the Donbass region, by Russia-backed so-called separatists fighting Ukrainian forces. Now, again, this focus to try to create what's described as a land corridor from Russia to Crimea, that annexed territory that was taken by Russia back in 2014. So very serious battles most likely ahead. Diplomacy still continuing. Virtual talks are going to be taking place today. But as you said, it seems very unclear how the two sides are going to be able to come up with a compromise they could both agree to.
Deborah, for now, many thanks indeed. We're joined now on the programme by Ukraine's Deputy Health Minister, Alexei Yeremenko. Minister, it's great to have you on the programme this morning. And I wonder if we might start with, the matters closest to your brief. Just how dire is the humanitarian situation in parts of Ukraine at the moment?
Hello. As for now, we observe unprecedented cruelty towards civil inhabitants. As you see from the news, Russian aggression targeted everyday residential areas, social infrastructure, as well as hospital with heavy missile strikes. In some region, the humanitarian corridors doesn't work, and we cannot bring medicine, water, and food to our cities, specifically Mariupol, Sumy, Chernihiv, and some other areas on the east. And it's very bad situation, and what we really need is to open a humanitarian corridor to bring medicine to the people in the hospitals.
Just in terms of the humanitarian aid you're receiving, I know that earlier this week, Minister, you said that the humanitarian aid was diminishing. I mean, where are you feeling the pinch most particularly in terms of that aid? What more can the West do in just at least the humanitarian area?
First of all, we appreciate all international support from countries and organizations that are bringing humanitarian medicines to Ukraine. We already received more than 2,600 tons of different medicine and medical equipment. But we need more because the number of attacks, airstrikes are increasing, and we need more analgesic, antibiotics, anesthetics, internal fixation system.
Tell us just a little bit then about the conditions inside some of those cities that you have mentioned. Mariupol, where we're looking at pictures from Irpin just now, where the city is, well, the suburb is pretty much entirely demolished. From inside Mariupol, though, however, we understand that there are still a number of people civilians living inside the city. Do you have a rough idea of numbers? Do you know the conditions that they're living in?
The number is more than 100,000 people, but we cannot get medicine to the Mariupol for the last 36 days. It means that the situation hardly bad, and we actually don't have a clear pictures about the whole humanitarian, how bad it's the humanitarian crisis there. But it's already critical for the last weeks.
Before we let you go, Minister, I do want to ask, of course, there are negotiations ongoing between the Ukrainian government representatives and those from Russia. Do you genuinely have any hope that a negotiated settlement is possible, given what you have seen the Russians do in places like Mariupol?
Thank you for your question. But the comments from Ukrainian side can only be president on this question could comment president and some people with from Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I cannot comment this.
I will accept that answer. Alexei, thank you so much for joining us in the programme this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, one of the organisers of the Oscars has claimed that police were prepared to arrest the actor Will Smith after he slapped the comedian Chris Rock live on stage. The show's producer, Will Packer, said the comedian spoke with police shortly after the incident.
It was the word they used in that moment. They said, we will go get him. We are prepared. We're prepared to get him right now. You can press charges. We can arrest him. They were laying out the options. And as they were talking, Chris was being very dismissive of those options. He was like, no, I'm fine. He was like, no. And even to the point where I said, Rock, let him finish.
Now, organisers of the Qatar World Cup have hit back at criticism after the president of the Norwegian Football Association condemned the country's poor human rights record. Qatar is in the spotlight today as it hosts the draw for the group stages of the Men's Football World Cup. Our correspondent Tom Parmenter is in Doha and joins us now. Good to see you, Tom. I mean, the war of words has been going on for almost as long as Qatar has tried to host the World Cup. It's going nowhere. They will be hoping that the pomp and circumstance and all the ceremony of the draw today might, serve as something of a lightning rod.
Yeah, this is the day that this tournament, the football of this tournament, starts to feel very real indeed. England will be in pot one. They are among the top seeds. They're among the favourites for this tournament. And Gareth Southgate has said that they are capable of getting to the final. They're capable of winning that final if they are near perfect. And the players will be coming at this tournament fairly fresh because it will happen in the middle of the season. It's not going to be the summer because it's simply too hot here in Qatar. So it'll start on the 21st of November and finish with a World Cup final just over a week before Christmas. So a very different feeling World Cup out here. One of Scotland, Wales or Ukraine will also be in the finals, but we won't know the result of their playoff until June because, of course, the conflict in Ukraine has postponed their playoffs. But that is a tantalising prospect. Could this be Gareth Bale's big swan song in a Wales shirt, or will the Tartan Army be camping in the desert come November here in Doha? The controversies around human rights of the workers who have built the stadiums, and of course this is a country where it is illegal to be gay, will all be part of the mix, and the hosts here in Qatar insist that everyone is welcome, and that promise will undoubtedly be put to the test. But the big draw is happening around 5 p.m. UK time. All the names in the hat, there'll be a group of death, no doubt, by the end of the day. There'll be all sorts of possibilities. They'll overcomplicate it. FIFA always do. But it is all happening here in Qatar, and the focus will be very much on who's facing who by the end of later today.
Tom, many thanks indeed. Well, let's stick with the topic and get a little bit more ahead of the draw. We're joined now by the former head of the FA, Mark Palios. Mark, great to have you on the programme this morning. I wonder if I can be somewhat cheeky with my first question here. In your mind, what first attracted FIFA to the oil-rich Arab nation, with a questionable human rights record? It couldn't have been money, could it?
Well, we know that it was awarded in pretty poor circumstances. First of all, the whole process was wrong. I mean, they actually had 2 World Cups being voted for at the same time. So you immediately gave them the opportunity to trade votes. And the question of trading votes and the question of paying for votes always surrounded the awarding of those 2 World Cups to Russia and in 2018 and to Qatar. I think if you look at it, you will see that there were 24 members of ExCo who would have voted on that. 2 were excluded for reasons of bribery and corruption. And since that time, of the remaining 22, 50% of them, 11 of them, have been banned for basically that as well. So, you can say this was a tournament that was born in controversy and has been mired in controversy right the way through.
Did they have to go ahead with it, though, Mark? I mean, was there not an opportunity for FIFA to have exited stage left at any point since Qatar were awarded the World Cup?
I think there was an opportunity, but it was a very difficult road to travel because you almost certainly would have got into heavy legal issues and whether FIFA, first of all, had the appetite for that in the early days. I don't think they did. And clearly, since then, Sepp Blatter has gone, partly as a consequence of what was going on at the time. And as the time moved forwards, it became less and less easy for FIFA to get out of it, basically, contractually. So I think that's it. Yes, they certainly could have exited, I think, but it would have been painful for them. But FIFA aren't known for taking sort of painful decisions, I think. And you saw it recently as well. They weren't immediately out of the traps as regards the response to what was happening in Ukraine.
To what extent, though, by your reckoning, have they actually managed to put their house in order? I mean, there were some that suggest, Gianni Infantino, more of the same in terms of the corruption that we saw from Sepp Blatter.
I think it's difficult to tell. I mean, one of the things that people talk about governance, and it's a very sort of soft issue that they talk about. It's the hardest issue because organisations are really sort of an amalgam of the people that are in there with their personal interests. The answer is I don't know, and time will tell as regards FIFA. But is the governance of FIFA better? I think it's probably slightly better. But, at the end of the day, you judge people by what they do. And, that's yet to be seen. And equally, Al Fawadi, who is the guy who's really responsible for delivering the World Cup in Qatar, has said many things. And, he's said the right things. But at the end of the day, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. And we'll see what happens when the tournament's run.
Do you know what, Mark? Shall we just for once we actually talk about the football? I mean, who do you want to see? Who do you want to see in England's draw? I mean, there are some very interesting possibilities that could arise out of the draw today.
Yeah, I look. We're in pot 1. You can't do better than that in your qualifying. And they'll then go to pot 2. And if you're looking at pot 2, who don't you want to see? Well, I'm very much of the belief that at the end of the day, if you want to win the World Cup, you've got to beat anybody. So, but it would be nice to get your foothold in the tournament and to grow into the tournament and therefore make it as easy as possible. I think of looking at pot 2, the only team I don't want, and maybe that's because of my age, is the German team. I think they won 9 out of 10 in their qualifying, so they're not in bad form. So if other than that, I'm fairly relaxed because I think this England team is a consequence not just of where we are today. It's a consequence of many years since we put in the 4-corner model. The FA put in the 4-corner model in 2007, and if it takes about 10 years to rattle through the system. So 10 years later, in 2017, we were the under-17 world champions, the under-19 European champions, and the under-20 world champions. So we have this sort of conveyor belt of more gifted players coming through, and we also have, what you do need is those relatively experienced players like Harry Kane and Maguire. And whilst he's criticised at times, Maguire, we've got one of the best defensive records of international teams. So I think we've got a very good chance.
Mark, the team to watch, Scotland. That's my shout, and I'm going to stick to it. Mark Malthouse, good to have you on the programme this morning. Do take care. Well, let's bring in Jackie Beltran, who I know has had, over the past few weeks, a thing or two to say about what's been going on in Qatar. We had a kind of a microcosm of it there. You know, we're all excited about the football, but we can't forget the stuff that's happening, not in the margins, but literally outside and inside the stadiums.
Yeah, absolutely. And Qatar were called out yesterday very publicly by the Norwegian FA, and they seemed sort of a bit disgruntled and uncomfortable that they would be criticised still at this point, you know, on the verge of the World Cup. You know, and the Norwegian president said, you know, it's unacceptable they were given it in the first place, but, you know, things like workers' rights haven't been addressed enough. 6,000 or more than 6,000 workers have died during the construction of these brand new 8 stadiums for the World Cup. And although Qatar say, you know, we have addressed criticisms, we have improved their conditions, we have paid compensation to the families of the workers who've died, others are saying, well, yeah, you know, but you are the ones under scrutiny. You are the ones hosting a World Cup. You may have better rights for your workers than your neighbouring countries, but that should be the case because you are the ones under the spotlight. And many countries believe that not enough has been done. Not enough has been done for gay people, you know, and even Gareth Southgate has said, you know, it is a shame that some England fans will feel uncomfortable going to this World Cup.
Jackie, many thanks indeed.